Global Finance, Topic 3, Exchange Rates, Quotes, Transactions, and Appreciations. Copyright Lou Gaddis. In this topic, we're going to talk about how to obtain and interpret exchange rates, how to convert one currency into another using direct and indirect quotations, and compute and interpret currency appreciations and depreciations. Let's first start from the beginning. In the US, the price of a latte at Starbucks is about $3. So we say the direct price quote of a latte is $3 per latte. This would be called a direct quote for an American. Any quote for a commodity priced in dollars would be a direct quote. Now you can also say that the latte price of $1 is 0.303 lattes per dollar. In other words, if I took 1 over 3.3, I would get 0.3 lattes per dollar. So we can say an indirect quote of lattes per dollar, or indirect quote of a latte is 0.3 lattes per dollar. Now this is kind of a strange way of thinking about it, but I could buy $1 with about a third of a latte, or I can buy one latte with $3.30. Now, luckily in America, lattes are always quoted in direct terms. Let's look at another commodity, not coffee, but let's look at a coin called a euro. The price of a euro coin is about $1.25 per euro for much of last year. So we say the direct quote for an American for a euro is $1.25. This is a direct quote in US dollar for an American. Now I could flip that 1 over 125 and say that the euro price of $1 is 0.8 euro. So I can buy $1 with 80 euro cents, or I can buy 1 euro with $1.25. 0.8 euro per dollar is called an indirect quote for the euro in America. The euro is usually quoted in direct terms, just like lattes are usually quoted in direct terms. This is called a Danish crown, or krone, or plural kroner. The direct quote for a Danish crown is about 16 cents per krone. This is a direct quote for an American. You can also say that the krone price of a US dollar is 6.25 krone per dollar. So if I take 1 over 16, I get 6.25 krone per dollar. So I can buy $1 US with 6.25 krone. This is called an indirect price for a krone for an American. Krone is usually quoted in direct terms in America. So is the Japanese yen, Swiss franc, Canadian dollars, Chinese yuan, Mexican peso, and Brazilian real. Whether an exchange rate is direct or indirect has a large impact when making calculations. Let's take another look at a map. These are the major currencies in the world and their currency symbols. Notice that dollars and a lot of pesos use this, what we call a dollar sign. So here's the US dollar, Brazilian real, Aussie dollar, another dollar currency, Russian ruble, Chinese yuan, Japanese yen, the euro. Here's some krone, Norwegian kroner, Danish kroner, Swedish kroner. Got the Swiss franc, it's independent. Got the British pound, South African rand, Indian rupee. So these are some of the major currencies in the world and their symbols. Now every currency is represented in finance with a 3-digit code, an ISO code. So for example, the Brazilian real is BRL, the US dollar is the USD. and so on. So some of the major codes, and if you go to this website here, you can get all the codes, but some of the major codes are the US dollar, the CAD, Canadian dollar, the Australian dollar, GBP would be the Great Britain pound, British pound, JPY, Japanese yen, CNY, Chinese yuan, and so on. It's important because a lot of times you go to websites to look for exchange rates, for example, Bloomberg.com or Yahoo, they'll just list the currency codes. So here is the dollar price of a euro. On this date was $1.31. Now what gets confusing with currencies is there's always going to be two codes. Now when it's the way you interpret codes is you might see EUR USD, or might see EUR USD without a slash, or you might say EUR dash USD. The way you interpret this is it's always the price of the first code quoted in terms of the second code. So if you see EUR USD, that is the dollar price of the euro. If you see US GBP USD, that is the dollar price, just like this one, the dollar price of the pound. Now CHF, that's actually the Swiss franc. That would be the Swiss franc price of a dollar. So this would be Swiss francs. USD SEK, that would be the Swedish krone price of a dollar. So these are in crown. These are the Danish kroner price of a dollar. That's in crown. Norwegian krone price of a dollar, and so on. Some other currencies. This would be the yen price of a dollar, the Hong Kong dollar price of a dollar, the US dollar price of an Australian, and the dollar price of, say, a New Zealand dollar or Kiwi. So that's how you interpret when you see two codes. The way you can think of it, it is the price of the first code, quote it in terms of the second code, or think about that second code is the one where you want to put the currency in. So if you see USD, that's actually a dollar quote. If you see JPY, this is actually in yen. Here's from a Bloomberg screen. So this shows, say, the US dollar price of a New Zealand dollar, Singapore dollar price of a US dollar, kroner price of a US dollar, dollar price of a pound, and so on. Here are some websites to go to if you're looking for some quotes. Or what I like to do is, if you memorize the codes or just seem to remember them, you could always just go to a website and just type in, say, EUR USD. EUR is the currency code for euro, and USD, and you'll see either I can click on it here, or usually I can see something that says chart or something like that, and you can get a quick quote for that currency. In this case, the dollar price of the euro is trading for 108. If I'm looking for the price of the Brazilian real, I can just do a search for the USD BRL, Brazilian real, and you can see right there is 3.23 real per dollar. Let's talk about currency conversions. Say the USD CAD exchange rate is 105. Now, the first question is this in dollars or is this in CAD? Well, this would be the CAD price of a dollar. So this is Canadian dollar per dollar. or you can write it this way. So if you knew the exchange rate and you said how many CAD can you exchange for $100, the easiest way to do it is I would just write down the currency you're given, and then you need to multiply it times an exchange rate. In this case, we know we need to get to Canadian dollars. Now you always have a choice when using an exchange rate. You can either use as quoted or flip it. And then the question is, which one do you do? Well, if you just remember back to cross multiplication, if I were to multiply this by an exchange rate, that would be CAD per dollar. The dollars would cancel out, and the Canadian will go forward. So in this case, I'm going to use 105 CAD, and that's the answer. You can exchange $100 for 105 Canadian. Now, if the problem said how many dollars can you exchange for 100 Canadian, I'd set up the problem this way: 100 CAD times what exchange rate equals dollar. Well, I'm going to just need to put CAD in the denominator, dollar in the numerator. CAD will cancel out. The problem is the exchange rate is CAD per dollar. To get to dollar per CAD, I just flip it, and I get 95.24. So that's how you solve simple conversions. Simply use cross multiplication and you'll get it right every time. Here's another example. Suppose the yen is quoted at 78 yen per dollar. How many dollars would you exchange for 10,000 yen? Well, in this case, I'll set the problem up. 10,000 yen times what exchange rate equals dollar? Well, I need a dollar per yen exchange rate, so the yen will cancel out. I'm given a yen per dollar exchange rate, so I got to flip it and take 1 over 78, and that'll give me $128. Or suppose you're told that the pound is selling for $1.55. So what that means, it's $1.55 per pound. And if you're looking for how many pounds could you exchange for $10,000, I would write down 10,000. I'm trying to get pounds, so I need a pound per dollar exchange rate, so the dollars cancel out. I got to flip this exchange rate, 1 over 155, and that gives me 6,451 pounds. So that's how you do both direct and indirect exchange rate conversions. Now let's talk about currency appreciations. Currency appreciations are important for a lot of reasons. For example, if you know the euro devalued 20% against the dollar, you would know that the price of, say, Paris hotels have just fallen by 20% as long as the quoted price in euro is unchanged. However, if you knew that you're paying Chinese labor, say a certain amount of yuan per dollar, and yuan appreciates 10%, the US dollar cost of that labor just went up 10%. So it's important to know what the currency exchange rate appreciation is, but it gets difficult when you're talking about direct and indirect exchange rates. In general, if you take a new minus an old over an old exchange rate, new spot price minus old spot price just meaning the current market price, over the old spot price, that will give you the percent change in the numerator currency. Let me explain what that means. If you see a quote that says $1.10 per euro, euro is the numerator currency. So I can just take the percent change, new minus old over old, now tell me what happened to the euro. Now I'm going to show you later. In this case, we know what happens to the euro, which tells me what happened, how much more expensive is my Paris hotel. But what if we want to know what was the depreciation or appreciation of the dollar? This is telling me the appreciation of the euro in terms of dollars. What if I want to know the appreciation of the dollar? All right, it's not just you wouldn't just change the sign. What you actually do is take old minus new over new, and I'll show you why, and that'll give you the percent change of the numerator currency. So let's look at a couple examples. Say the dollar goes from the euro goes from $1.50 to $1.65. All right, the price of a euro goes up. And you say, well, what was the appreciation of the euro? Because I want to see how much my euro revenue is worth more as an American. Well, I'll just take the new exchange rate minus the old over the old. 165 minus 150 over 150. That's a 10% appreciation of the euro, the denominator currency. Remember, $1.50 per euro. Euro's denominator. Now, if you want to know, say a German wants to know what happened to the dollar, well, I could just rearrange the exchange rates and make everything euro price of $1. So the exchange rate went from 1 over 150 to 1 over 165. That would be what happened to the euro per dollar exchange rate. And I can do that. The new exchange rate, euro per dollar, is 1 over 165 minus 1 over 150 over 1 over 150. That's new minus old over old, where dollar's in the denominator. If I were to do this math, you would get a negative 9% appreciation or a 9% depreciation of the currency. Now, it just so happens mathematically that if you don't feel like flipping the exchange rates, this is equivalent of, instead of taking new minus old over old, where you flip all the exchange rates, and that gives you the value or the appreciation of the numerator currency, you can just take old minus new over new exchange rates. That'll tell you what happened to the euro. So if this were to happen, Americans would observe that Parisian hotels are 10% more expensive. But Parisians would notice that New York City hotels are 9% cheaper. Okay, so you can't, although it's a good approximation, you can't just flip the sign if you're looking for a precise valuation or change in the dollar price of a good or the euro price of a good. So here's another example. Say the CAD per dollar exchange rate went from 105 to 103. Notice something got cheaper, but let's look at this exchange rate. This is the Canadian dollar price of a US dollar. This is the price of a dollar. So it looks like the US dollar went down, the CAD went up. So if I were to take new minus old over old, it would tell me what happened to the numerator currency, the US dollar. So the US dollar is down 1.905%. So for Canadians getting a hotel in Buffalo, New York, the price just fell by 1.905%. So what is the appreciation of the CAD? Well, I could just flip these exchange rates, 1 over 103, 1 over 105, 1 over 105, that's this, and I'll get negative 1.94%. Or I can just do old minus new over new, and that'll tell me what happened to the numerator, which in this case is the Canadian dollar. So again, this seems like a trivial fact, but if you're in an industry with 5% margins, it makes a difference whether you're good just to change some price by 1.94% or 1.90%. So why are currency appreciations important? Well, kind of talked about this the whole time. If the euro depreciates 10% against the dollar, the US dollar revenue of a euro-denominated receivable will fall by 10%. In other words, you sell a widget to a German at a fixed US dollar price. At a fixed euro price. If the euro depreciates 10%, when you go to sell the euros you gained in trade, you're just going to get 10% less dollars than you thought. And if your margins aren't 10% to start with, you're now not profitable. Now, if the Chinese yuan appreciates 10% against the dollar, the US dollar of any labor cost just went up by 10%. And if the dollar appreciates 10% against major currencies, US exports are in general are 10% more expensive to the rest of the world. And that's what's happening now. The US dollar is greatly appreciated against all major, or for most of the major currencies, making our products less competitive. Now, if we look at the Brazilian real just since January, the real from January went from 2.66 real per dollar to 3.22 real per dollar from January 2015 to March of 2015. So what you see, this is the price of the dollar. So what we see is the dollar appreciated and the real depreciated. Now, if you wanted to know how much cheaper goods are in Brazil right now, since that's a numerator, I'm going to take old minus new over new. And I'll get around negative 17%. So since January, Brazil is now on sale. Things are 17% cheaper as long as the prices haven't changed. Quoted prices in real. Now what's going to get complicated, and we're going to talk about in a later topic, is one reason the real is depreciating is because they have higher inflation. So say they had 5% higher inflation over the last 3 months. Well, that means their prices are up 5%. So that's going to offset this. So if prices are up 5% and the currency is down 17%, maybe the goods are only 12% more expensive, but that's a later topic. So here are some basic questions. When you see a quote of 95 yen as the price, as a quoted price of the yen, and someone says the price of the yen went from 95 yen to 85 yen, what they're implicitly saying is the yen price of a dollar went from 95 to 85. Now the first thing you would ask is, what is this quote the actual price of? Right? This is the actual price of $1 US. Right? So that is the price of a US dollar. It's a indirect quote for the yen, but that is the price of a US dollar quoted in yen. So when the exchange rate went down, it's the dollar that depreciated. And if you want to know the depreciation of the dollar, since that's in the denominator, I can just take new minus old over old. 85 minus 95 over 95, the dollar's down 10.5%. If I want to know what happened to the yen, I can just take 95 minus 85 over 85, and the yen's appreciated 11.76%. Here's another example. Say the crown euro exchange rate goes from 4.25 crown to 450 crown. Implicitly, that means crown per euro. So we can say that this is actually the price of a euro, and the euro is appreciated, and the crown must have depreciated against the euro. So what was the appreciation of the crown? Well, we said the euro is up, so the crown must be down. So it can't be one of these solutions. How much is it down? Well, I can flip my exchange rates, or I can just say, well, I'm just going to take old minus new over new. That's going to tell me what happened to the numerator currency, and it's down 5.56%. And here are some more practice problems based on these exchange rates. Yuan per dollar, peso per dollar, yen per dollar, dollar per euro, dollar per pound, US dollar price of a CAD. Now in this case here, I'm quoting this as dollars. So even though this looks like ISO codes, this is the dollar price of a euro. So because you can see that symbol right there. And here's some practice in doing currency conversions. Like for example, how much could you get for 100 how many yuan would you get for 100 US dollars? Put down dollars. I need yuan per dollars for dollars to cancel out, and it gives me 676 yuan. Suppose another example, or suppose the Norwegian krone goes from 550 to 650. What was the appreciation in krone? What was the appreciation of the euro? So this is the krone price of a euro goes from 550 to 650. That's an appreciation of the euro. If you want to know the appreciation of the euro, just take new minus old over old. New minus old over old. That'll give me the euro appreciation. If I want to know, and that'll tell me how much more expensive euro goods are to Norwegians. If I want to know how much Norwegian prices went up for Europeans or for Eurozone members, I could take old minus new over new, and that'll tell me the change in price of the crown. So in this topic, we talked about direct and indirect exchange rates. Direct exchange rates would just be the dollar price of a good. Talked about how to calculate conversions of exchange rates, and you just remember to write down whatever currency needs to be converted, figure out what currency needs to be converted to. That'll tell you how to get the exchange rate. In this case, it would be, say, currency X into currency Y. I just need to multiply times the Y over X exchange rate, whatever that happens to be, and that'll tell me how many currency Ys it'll exchange for. And lastly, we talked about how to calculate the appreciation and depreciation of a currency. You can think of every exchange rate as a numerator currency over a denominator currency, say $1 per euro. If you use the percent change formula, new minus old over old, that'll always tell you what happened to the denominator. If you do old minus new over new, that'll tell you what happened to the numerator.